Okay. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, or in Dr. Brown's case, good morning, as she is joining us from the other side of our country here. But I am Maria Ronenberger, educational consultant for Patnel Harrisburg and the EL Initiative State Lead. I am joined by my esteemed colleagues and L Initiative team partners, Kirsten DeRoche, serving our eastern region of Pennsylvania, and Heather Parumba, serving our western region of PA. We will be here acting as your facilitators for today's session, and it is with our greatest pleasure to be able to welcome you to our first of 3 sessions entitled Best Practices for Distinguishing Language Acquisition from Learning Disabilities. Our session today is entitled Supporting Multilingual Learners through a Culturally and Linguistically Responsive MTSS Framework. All right, so we first want to tell you today, before I introduce you to our much anticipated presenter today, I would like to remind you that we here at Patnel Initiative specialize and focus our work on English learners with disabilities. We work with helping you all to support them with asset-based supports to maximize their academic achievements and language acquisition. We here provide technical support and training for schools to ensure they have culturally and linguistically responsive practices in place to identify needs, address disparities, improve access to equitable services, and produce better outcomes for all multilingual learners. We also want to remind you that here at Patnel, it is very important to consider the communities that we serve and in which our students live, and family engagement promotes equitable partnerships among schools, families, and communities to actively promote student achievement through shared commitment, decision-making, and responsibilities. So, before I introduce our speaker, I just want to remind you of a couple of things that we're all pretty well versed with, but if you just need a reminder and haven't done one of these in a while, just remember to use your mute button. We do ask that you stay muted at this time. We do have, if you want to share your face with us, you may, we welcome that, but we understand that your day is busy, and if you want to have your video off, we respect that as well. So also, we do want you to make use of your participator buttons if it does come up and a presenter does ask for your involvement, which will be the case. So, last, your chat. This will be utilized here, and we do invite all of your questions. Please share with us any questions that you have. Feel free to do that at any point in time in the chat, and we will be capturing those, and we will hopefully be able to answer them for you. As always, we remind you, please, to be respectful in our group session. Please be aware of your camera and your microphone and using the chat feature as such. We also ask that you stay present and you participate with us. We are just so thrilled to have you today. Now, without wasting any more time, I would like to take a moment to introduce our featured presenter. Dr. Julia Esparza Brown is a professor of special education at Portland State University. Prior to joining PSU, she worked in public schools as a special bilingual special education teacher and a school psychologist. Her teaching, research, and publications focused on the intersection of language, disability, race, and culture, and she is a passionate advocate for equity in education. Additionally, she regularly consults and presents nationally and internationally on these issues. Dr. Brown recently completed a 4-year term as an elected school board member for the largest school district in Oregon. Currently, she is principal investigator of a personal preparation grant through the Office of English Language Acquisition to prepare diverse special educators and to improve literacy outcomes for multilingual students. Dr. Brown recently completed work as principal investigator on a model demonstration grant funded through the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Programs that investigated culturally and linguistically responsive literacy interventions within an MTSS framework for English learner students at risk for or with disabilities, also known as projectlead.org. She has also been principal investigator on 4 federal personnel preparation grants. Her current co-authored book, Supporting English Learners in the Classroom, Distinguishing Language Acquisition from Learning Disabilities, is available through Teacher College Press. Now, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Julie.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm so happy to see so many of you this morning on this, I guess, for you, Friday afternoon. I am going to pull up my slides here. Oh, why aren't they open? Here we go. And get started. So great. Thank you for the thumbs up. That's what I was just going to ask for. So today we're going to be looking at the unique considerations for, and I have begun using the term multilingual students. We know that what's in a name, that English learners go by very many names. They used to be limited English proficient students, and then we switched to a more positive label with English learners. And now to continue to emphasize their assets, I tend to use the term multilingual students. So that's what you'll see within this presentation. So we'll look at the unique considerations for multilingual learners within an MTSS framework. So how do we make these systems culturally and linguistically responsive or sustaining? We'll look at how to differentiate core instruction to align with multilingual learners' backgrounds and both cultural and linguistic, and ensure that any challenges that they are maybe experiencing are not simply the result of the lack of appropriate or aligned instruction. So how do we make sure that appropriate instruction is being provided to all of our students? We'll be looking at the use of data to, again, determine appropriate instruction in core, and then also to help us determine those students that really are outliers from their true peer groups who might need more specialized kinds of supports. And then how we align instruction and interventions to ML students' context across the tiers. So we have a lot to get to today, and I'm so excited that you're all here. Here's an outline of what our time together will look like. I won't read this, but you have seen the session description before when you registered, but I'd like to include it here to remind you what we're doing today. To begin with, I want to share with you a quote from a principal in one of my partner schools here in Oregon. And she says, "The foundation of equitable education is effective tier 1 for all students. Otherwise, the rest of MTSS is null and void." And there is so much truth in this. And we have to ensure that tier 1 core instruction meets the needs of all students. Otherwise, we can't start looking at student-focused interventions when it should be maybe a system-focused intervention. All right, and with that, Kirsten, were we going to do a poll to see who's in the room?
Yes, we sure can. Let me go ahead and launch that right now.
Great. So I would love to see, as you think about this quote, who is in the room and what roles you play. So I should stop share. And then
There we go. I finally got it. Sorry, everybody.
Good. So I'd love to see who's here. Oh, I see school psychologist, speech language. Awesome.
And I'm just watching the little percentage of folks who have been able to interact with that. I know some folks maybe aren't able to, so we'll get as close to 100% as we can. And
Great.
then I'll share so everybody can see who else is here too.
Great. So let's see.
A couple more, I think, would be helpful if they're available.
What I love to see is that there's a mixture of people. Unfortunately, not too much in gen ed. I'm sure it's hard to get coverage for classrooms. Some special ed. I love to see administrators here, school psychs.
And if you're an other and you want to enter into the chat what your other role is, that would be great.
Who did we miss? Great. All right. That's really helpful. Thank you so much for doing that. I think there'll be a little for everybody in here today. So great. All right. Can I take? I'll take.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay, great. Here we go. And close that up. Okay, so let's move on. I want to remind you of Pennsylvania's equity pillars that I really like the way that this is laid out. And we'll actually be talking about quite a few of these pillars throughout the presentation today, really looking at how data can help us ensure equitable practices and to ensure that all students are meeting high academic expectations or have the ability to meet their own goals. So I wanted to remind you of that. And here, let's jump into it. So we'll be really looking through an asset-based lens, changing the mindset from what multilingual learners or English learners can't do, instead to, what they can do and questions that we can ask. So instead of thinking that, well, they can't speak English, well, let's shift to what language or languages can they speak? Many of our students come with a wealth of languages, more than one language, more than two languages sometimes that they are proficient in. So how do we learn about their backgrounds and build upon that? Or from my English learners aren't able to read on grade level to instead, how can I accommodate this text? What resources are available? What other types of books on tape or videos can I provide for students to have access? And also to ask, what do students know in their first language? So many of our students come to us, if they've immigrated here, from strong foundations in their first language from their home countries that we need to know about. I don't know how to help my English learners. Instead, well, who can I reach out to for support? Where can I learn more? And just the fact that you're here today, that's a first step for learning more. And we'll be talking about collaborative teams. So who on your campus or in your district can you go to learn more? And my English learners seem off task, angry, or unhappy. And instead, how can I make the classroom environment inviting and safe and comfortable for them? And with technology today, there are so many ways to make this happen. So we'll be talking about all of this throughout the presentation. Okay, so I want to start with the big principle of what is culturally and linguistically responsive or aligned practice. Now, we often hear culturally responsive practice, but I want to make clear that it's also essential that we really focus on the linguistically aligned practice as well. So what this framework focuses on then are the strengths and life experiences of our students, of each student. We consider their assets and strengths by looking at their backgrounds, their values, their beliefs, experiences, their language or languages, their family, and the communities to leverage these throughout all instruction. So that means building relationships with our students and their families to then, again, use those experiences within our classrooms. But the latest framework has moved from just knowing about their background to really encouraging what's now called a culturally sustaining pedagogy. And a culturally sustaining pedagogy is linguistic, literate, and cultural pluralism as part of the democratic project of schooling and as a needed response to the demographic and social change that's occurring in our classrooms. So it really is about bringing all of this into the center of our instruction. It's grounded within the ecology of each student, and for us to really delve into knowing their pre-existing skills and strengths, again, that asset-based, and using those and building upon those. But it begins with relationship building. As I said in the earlier slide, it's really understanding our students, taking the time to learn about their community and the community at large. It's about knowledge across languages that we gather through screening and assessments and then build upon their knowledge base. So it is asking us to really learn the most that we can about our students. And I also understand that if you're especially at the secondary level, you might have hundreds of students in your classes that you see each day, and that learning about the backgrounds of each student might be difficult, but this is particularly important for those that you see floundering in your classes. So those might be a place to start. If you see students struggling, so what is it that you need to know about them in order then to have the correct intervention in place or response or supports? Okay. All right. So with that context, let's talk more about, well, who are English learners? As you can see from the slide, they come to us with many languages from many countries, and also many that are born in the United States. So multilingual learners are definitely a very diverse group. So here you see at the top, multilingual learners, but they include all of these profiles. They might be students who have recently immigrated here. And those students can be very fragile if they've immigrated here because of war, conflict at home. So they may come to us needing a lot of emotional support. Many, including 72% of the entire population, are born in the United States. And it's actually, data shows that US born English learners are the lowest achieving group of multilingual learners. So that's pretty shocking for many of us. English learners might have only little or some English skills, no English skills, or they might have strong English skills and their strong home language skills, or a mixture of both. They can be simultaneous bilinguals or sequential bilinguals. And simultaneous bilinguals means that from birth, they are exposed to two languages at about an equal proportion and learn those kind of side by side. And that's a strong profile. That's an asset. Or they can be sequential bilinguals where they learn one language at birth that they hear and learn for a while. And then at some point, they're exposed to a second language. However, oftentimes in this profile, the students may not fully develop their first language when they may switch and have more exposure to a second language. And much like in construction, if we don't have a firm foundation on a house that we build, particularly if it's a multi-level structure, then it's not going to be stable. It's not going to be strong. So we really need to work on encouraging communities and families to help students fully develop their first languages as well as additional languages. Okay. So hopefully that gives you an idea of really the universe of multilingual learners, which again is a very heterogeneous group. And as was shared with you earlier, along the way, feel free to ask questions in the chat, and our moderators will let me know if there's something that we should be answering at any point in time. And I am trying to make my screen here. Okay. So now we're going to hop into talking more about issues in language use. So language, what do we know about language? Well, language is a tool for communication. And language comprehension skills, we know through the science of reading data and data over decades, is that language comprehension skills are critical to reading success, particularly for multilingual learners. So that has to be something that we attend to, whether we're a literacy teacher, a math teacher, a PE teacher, a music teacher. These language skills cannot be assumed, and we have to really make sure that all of our language that we're using is clear and comprehensible to our language learners. And particularly literacy instruction, which will be the focus of today, will be enhanced with oral language instruction. It must be enhanced with oral language instruction and include a focus on all aspects of language, not just vocabulary. We have, I think, really emphasized vocabulary in our work with English learners over a long period of time, but I want to make sure that we consider all aspects of language. So it's syntax, listening comprehension, semantics, and morphology, all aspects of language, not just vocabulary, although vocabulary is incredibly important. So let's talk a little bit about language registers. So in an educational context, we generally talk about language as having two registers. And if you're as old as me and have been in education almost 40 years like I have been, you may have heard the terms BICS and KELP in the past. BICS used to be the lighter that we'd hold out at a concert rather than flashing our phones now. BICS, that stood for basic interpersonal communication skills, that we now call the social register or interpersonal language. And KELP used to be called cognitive academic language proficiency, and now we just call it academic language. So these two registers are important concepts for us as educators to know about. So let's begin with the social or interpersonal language register. And this is what students can be proficient in fairly quickly. So it's a language register that is everyday language. Sometimes we call it playground language. It's social language. It's what you use with friends. It lacks formality. It could be, hey, dude, how goes it today? So it's the language to communicate among friends and on playgrounds. It's informal, however, and it develops pretty quickly, but it's not particularly supportive to the academic instruction, and which tends to be, with the academic register, tends to include words with Latin and Greek roots that we'll be looking at in a moment here. But so students might come in with no language, no English language, and within, a few months, a year, be able to speak. They sound fairly proficient, but if we listen carefully to the language, it's generally this informal register. And again, that is not the register of textbooks and classroom instruction. So what we need to do is help students develop this academic register. And it becomes especially important by later elementary and middle school, because we do know that instead of learning to read, we're reading to learn. And the language structures and vocabulary become increasingly sophisticated, and which can be really confusing to multilingual learners. But there's good evidence that suggests that we can use that social language and bridge the concepts to new terms, new academic terms. So we are always looking to make connections for students to really help them with their understanding of concepts and new terms. So students learning a second language will progress through 5 or 6 stages of language acquisition in about 5 to 7 years. So that's what loads of research has shown us, that it takes the average students. Some students that are particularly gifted in languages might progress at a quicker pace. And there's also a little bit of data, it's rather limited, that on students with disabilities that could take 9 years or more, or maybe never become proficient in a second language if they have difficulties in their first language because of disabilities. So the average time it takes for a second language learner to progress through the stages to become a fluent English speaker could be 5 to 7 years. So that's a long time, and we can't wait for them to become proficient in order to access content. So then that becomes our job to make instruction understandable and accessible to students at every stage of language acquisition in our classes. So students need to be able to switch between language registers as appropriate for the situation and context. So we also have to be explicit in helping them to understand when it's okay to say, hey, dude, you know, what's up today, versus good mornings and greetings and such more formal language. And this becomes especially important as we help students get ready for the world of work. So here's some examples of what in the characteristics of informal language on the left-hand side of the slide versus academic language. So informal language, you'll hear a lot of repetitions of words. Sentences could start with and or but, you know, it's informal. Use of slang, but it's appropriate for casual, social, hallway, playground settings. And it can vary greatly by ethnicity, region, gender, age. And I'm sure that you've seen that, and by community, right? Versus academic language, where a much wider vocabulary, expansive vocabulary, and more sophisticated vocabulary is used. Sentences might start with transition words. We use more descriptive and accurate vocabulary. It's appropriate for all academic and workplace settings, and it's a common language register for all. So we need students to become proficient in academic language for many, many reasons, as we've been saying. So again, if you listen carefully to students that you might assume are proficient because they speak a lot, listen to the characteristics of that language, because it's often at that social register. And again, we need to help them start bridging to be able to almost code switch to that academic register as well. And we will be talking about ways of instructional strategies as our morning or afternoon progresses. Now, I want to refer you to your own state information, that your state is part of the largest second language consortium in the country, and that is the WIDA consortium. And so your standards are WIDA standards. There's about, 40 states that belong to the WIDA consortium. Now, here in Oregon, we do not. We belong to a much smaller consortium of just a few states. And what that means is we have different English language development standards, although they're similar, and we use different assessments. Now, for students whose families, upon school registration, mark that there is a language other than English that may be spoken in the home, they will be given a screener, a WIDA screener that will then identify students who need this English language development support. And then these standards become academic standards, just like reading and math, for students that qualify for the ESL or ELD program. And we're not going to talk or unpack these today, but I refer you to your own state information. I'm sure there's many trainings that you can find, or asking your own ESL, ELD specialist at your school to help show you what these standards are, would be good for you to know. Great. All right. So I also really want to make us aware of this concept that language and identity are intertwined. So students come to us with their social language or their community language. And there was a lot of discussion. I know we've looked at that in the past through a deficit lens of, well, students come speaking their Ebonics or their, whatever, and it's not proper English. Well, what's important to know is that that language is absolutely proper in their community and in their homes, and that we can't disrespect the language that they come with. Now, is that language going to be appropriate for formal academic settings and workplace settings? Maybe not. So we have to then, again, really be clear in instructing academic language and the appropriate times in which to switch registers. But the language that they come to us is a language and should not be disrespected as improper language. But again, we teach the students more formal language and when it is appropriate to use more formal language or community language, depending on the situation. So again, looking at language and students, what they bring to the school door with them as assets. All right, so you've sat there listening to me a little bit. Now you're going to have a chance to experience what it's like to be a language learner. So get ready, it's your turn to practice. So here's how we're going to do it. And I think Kirsten's going to launch another poll here, and we're going to be responding to, do you speak Spanish? Yes, no, or partially. Let's see what your backgrounds are. Okay, a little bit, partially. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to ask those of you that do speak Spanish to just bear with me in this little activity that we're going to do, because you might understand the answers a little more quickly. Okay, thank you. We're ending that poll. Stop sharing, get back to. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. So I'm going to give you a scenario. I'm going to read you a little lesson, and we're going to have I'm going to read it 3 times. And the first slide, what you see in red is going to be in English, but the rest of the lesson is going to be in Spanish. So the percentage of what you understand in English might be what a beginning English learner that has a little knowledge of English in your classes might understand of one of your lessons that is instructed in English. And I want you to see if you can get the main concept of the lesson. So your turn. Listen. Good morning, clase. Today vamos a estudiar algo nuevo en math class. Es difícil, así que voy a necesitar la atención de todos. Open your book to page 172. En la top de la page está la palabra neto. La lección de today es sobre la neto. Como dicen en la definición en su book en math, neto es un modelo de 2 dimensiones. El neto de un cilindro se muestra en su book. ¿Todos ven el rectangle y 2 circles? Ese es el neto del cilindro. All right, so do you understand what neto is? Another poll here. Yes, partially, or no? So if you spoke some Spanish, you might. Okay, but we see a lot of no's. All right. Well, there was a little bit of English interspersed in there. So what if, now if you're an intermediate language learner and you know a little bit more English, let's see if that knowledge helps you to understand the lesson. Good morning, class. Today we're going to study algo nuevo in math class. It's difficult, así que going to need everyone's atención. Open your book to page 172. En la top of the page está la palabra neto. Today's lesson is sobre la neto. Como dice en la definición en su book in math, neto es un modelo de 2 dimensiones. El neto de un cylinder se muestra en su book. ¿Todos ven el rectangle and 2 circles? Ese es el neto del cylinder. So now, look how much red there is here. A lot of English. Did you understand it better? Do you know what page number you're supposed to go to? So what do you understand now? How much more? So another poll. Did you understand what neto is? Are you getting it? Partially, okay, getting a little better, a little better. Now let's get to, if you're at a higher level of English proficiency, look at all this red. So let's see how you do now. Good morning, class. Today we're going to study something nuevo in math class. It's difficult, so I'm going to need everyone's atención. Open your book to page 172. At the top of the page is the word neto. Today's lesson is sobre neto. Como dice la definition in your book in math, neto is a model of 2 dimensiones. El neto of a cylinder se muestra in your textbook. Does everyone see the rectangle and 2 circles? Ese es el neto del cylinder. Okay, now how are we doing? Last poll. Do you get it? Oh, good. Seen a lot of yeses. Okay. And remember, a student at this level may have been immersed in English or learning English for maybe even 4 years. So it takes a while to get to this much understanding of English. All right. So what's happening to students in the earlier levels of English proficiency? If we have a lesson then that they're not understanding 100% of the words, are they really understanding the lesson? So this is what happens to our students. But what if we did it differently and we used cognates, visuals, and videos? So here we go. What if, and I'm going to stop sharing this, we started with a video. And I will share this, and it looked like this.
Let's learn about nets. To help us understand what a net is, let's start off by doing a bit of exploring. So let's say that we have this oatmeal container. Now oatmeal can sometimes come in cardboard cylinders that look like this. So here we're dealing with a cylinder. Now, let's say we want to take this cylinder and break it down and flatten it out to see what that looks like. Well, in order to do that, we don't really want to step on the container to flatten it. We want to break this down in a way that we can see all the different pieces of this cylinder without having to keep turning it all around. Well, if we take a look, we have a circle on the top and on the bottom. Those are the bases of the cylinder. If we start unfolding this cylinder, breaking it down, we would have a circle on the top and on the bottom, just like that. Now, what about this curved surface that goes all the way around? Well, say we just cut from one base to another and then unroll and flatten out that surface. Well, if we unroll that surface, it would be a rectangle. So we would end up getting something that looks.
So you get the idea there. And let me get back to our PowerPoint. Share. And if we show that netho is a cognate in English, and a cognate means words that are the same or very close to the same and have the same meaning. So Spanish, the word is netho. In English, it is net. Now, I understand that if you have more of a math background, that this might be more understandable to you, but using cognates, certainly we can define the cognate across the languages and using visuals. So how does that help our instruction? Now, do we understand? So let's get some comments in the chat, if you would. So what did you learn from this lesson? Or any insights? So I'd love to hear some comments.
So there were two that were coming in even before you asked, and there's one here that says this also is going to require, oh no, now they're flying in, so I need to slow down. Require background knowledge of math vocabulary that's in Common Core. The visuals are a game changer.
Yes.
Visuals introduce and reinforce. Less talking is better. Maybe, and what is a net? Great to get our information visually that way. Visuals, modeling, those are key.
And I love when somebody said how frustrating it could be to only understand portions of what people are saying. And that's the everyday, every moment lives of multilingual learners, right? They only understand portions. And then how are they going to really access instruction if they don't understand, 100% of the conversations and the instruction? So that's why, again, thinking of ways, and we'll be talking about this throughout the presentation, of making instruction and concepts really clear. It's so much easier these days with visuals because you could pull things up on your phone in a matter of seconds. Now, in the old days when I did this work, many decades ago, I would have to go to the public library and get their old stacks of National Geographics and cut out pictures and glue them onto little index cards. And some of you, if you're old like me, might remember doing that work in order to have visuals to make, instruction clear for multilingual learners. But now it's just so much easier with videos and pictures that you can pull up. So really, it's just thinking very quickly ahead of time. It takes not much time to preview information so that students are really understanding content. So that's the point. Great. So thanks for bearing with me through that. And now, so as a reminder, while children can develop initial informal oral fluency fairly rapidly, it takes much longer, including many years of, and this is important, explicit language instruction to develop the more complex structures of formal academic language, meaning they're not just going to develop this language by multiple repetitions or just hearing it. We really need explicit instruction of terms, vocabulary, and opportunities to use it in meaningful ways in order for students to then deeply learn the language. Okay. All right. Now there's a concept that is fairly new in the academic world, but really it's an old concept. We used to call this code switching. And code switching in the language world used to be a bad term. Oh, students code switch. That's because they don't know enough of one language in order to speak a complete sentence in one language. But now we really have reconceptualized that concept to understand that students are using their assets and resources in the language or languages that they know to try to communicate. And we call this new concept TransLanguaging. So even in English only instructional settings, students should be able to use their linguistic resources to support communication. Now, that might mean that students mix their two languages within one sentence. And if you're an English only speaker, it may be then difficult for you to totally understand their communication, but there are apps available to help with translation. And again, allowing students to mix their languages is allowing them to use their assets. So we don't want to discourage that. We want to encourage translanguaging. So we've reconceptualized the deficit of code switching to now calling it translanguaging. And again, understanding that it's students' ways of using the totality of their knowledge base of languages to communicate. So that's important.
And Julie, we have a quick question in the chat here. Erin is asking, is this kind of the same thing as interlanguage?
That's a great question, and I am not sure. I'm not a speech pathologist. I'm not quite sure what interlanguage is.
So Julie, if you don't mind me jumping in here.
I would love it.
Yeah, the term interlanguage. So when we're talking about interlanguage versus translanguaging, the concept is a little bit the same, a little bit different. So interlanguage is that theory that exists in which when one is acquiring a second language, that they are borrowing the constructs. And it's actually a language of its own, though, that stands on its own. Translanguaging is more of using consciously or subconsciously using the creativity of their first language with their other languages and using it in the classroom to be able to construct meaning. So there's a little bit of a nuance difference, but I'm glad you brought up that the way that I understand it, interlanguage. So it's that theory that in between of borrowing the principles and parameters from the first language into the second language. And it's kind of that thought that there's like a whole nother language that is existing in that time of acquisition. So that in-between stage.
Great, thank you. I should learn that. So that's really helpful. And again, I think what we're seeing is as students, are really trying to understand the structures of both languages and how they fit together. And again, translanguaging would be perhaps a stage as they're learning to develop both languages. And what we want them to get to is certainly fluency in both a home language and in English. All right, so now we're going to do a little test. And so if you would in the chat, just type T or F for what you think the answers are, that would be great. Okay, so the presence of an accent is an indication of an individual's level of proficiency in English. The thicker the accent, the less proficient they are. So what do you think? True or false? Oh, good. I see a lot of false. Absolutely. So an accent is not an indication at all of a language proficiency, and it's not an indication of anybody's intelligence either. An accent really has more to do with perhaps the stage of language development and the age of which that second language was introduced to a person, an individual, because babies are born with the ability to hear any sound that's available in the world. But basically, what happens is the brain prunes the cells of the it has attuned itself to the sounds that it hears in a baby's first year of life. So therefore, it becomes harder and harder as the individual matures to hear sounds that are non-native. So again, accent has nothing to do with proficiency or intelligence. So that was false. Okay, so the next one, let's see, is this student? There we go. Children learn languages faster and better than adults do, and this is why it's important to expose them to as much English as possible when they are young. True or false? What do we think? Okay. Yeah, children do learn languages faster. Adults can learn it better, certainly by building on the structure of their first language, right? So it's easier to build that foundation, that second floor, on a strong foundation. But it is important to expose children to language to their languages as early as possible. But what we want to take care of is that we are not discouraging the development of that first language as we add English, because again, that first foundation of their home language is critical. Next, a child can eventually catch up to monolingual English-speaking peers simply by us increasing the amount of language a child hears daily, which is why teaching in English is so important. Is that true or false? Okay, that is actually false, because remember, just hearing language is not teaching language. Children need not just exposure, but actual instruction of language and opportunities in which to use that in meaningful ways. So it's not just about hearing the language. So we used to call this sink or swim. If we just immerse them in an English classroom and they're hearing English all day long, you experienced some of that in the last activity that we did. There, you may hear it, but it doesn't mean that you understand it. And that doesn't lead to total English fluency. We've seen that through decades of research on sink or swim models. So that's why, again, we need to change our strategies to make sure that students are understanding concepts and learning language. Learning two languages can lead to a kind of linguistic confusion where one language will effectively interfere with the learning of the other language. This is why it's best to make sure that the child is learning and hearing only one language. True or false? Great. Looking at the chat. Yes, it is false. Even students that have many types of disabilities can become bilingual, and they do not get confused by it. So language confusion doesn't occur by becoming bilingual. And it was interesting. I had a situation where one of my former students, when she was in classes with me, was interpreting at a parent-teacher conference. And this was a few years back, but I think that this assumption might still occur. And she was interpreting for a bilingual parent, and the parent said to the teacher, you know, I bought my daughter some books in our home language, and I'm trying to teach her to read in that and to, you know, encourage her use of home language. Is that good? And the teacher, through my student, the interpreter, says, no, that will confuse her. Only read to her in English. And the mother didn't really read English anyway. And my student interprets that back to the mother and says, yes, that's absolutely the best thing to do. Read to her in her home language. And I told my student, well, that, you know, violates the standards, of interpreting that you were only the messenger, but I understood what her idea was, and she was correct, that it doesn't lead to confusion. And we do want to encourage families to use and read and teach their students their strong home language. Learning two languages will lead to poor academic performance, particularly because the time spent on native language is time wasted in learning English. And you can, true or false, I think you get the idea by now. Okay, and last, code switching is a good example of a type of language disorder and poor grammatical ability that will accompany children who have not had sufficient exposure to English. And we just talked about that, so I think you could quickly put the answer, true or false. Great. Well, at least that keeps you awake. Y'all passed. So just as a reminder, accent's not an indicator of proficiency. Children do not learn languages faster and better than adults do. They only seem to because they have better pronunciation. But again, we do want to encourage that first foundation, but expose and help teach language early on. For the average child, language development cannot be accelerated, but having developed one language to a high degree does help them build that second language foundation. Learning two languages does not lead to linguistic confusion, and it does not do so even for children that have experienced disabilities. Learning two languages does not lead to poor academic outcomes, and actually, to the contrary, we see that students who have been long-term in dual language programs tend to outperform students in monolingual programs. And as we said, code switching is not an example of a language disorder. All right, so hopefully that'll a little learning there for you. Now, the next slides, we're not going to delve into deeply. They're more here for your reference, and they come from my book, Haas and Brown 2019, that give you some characteristics of just general language differences. So on the right-hand side, these are characteristics of things that students that are learning a second language might experience. So they might have errors similar to other English learners, students who have comparable backgrounds, limited vocabulary in their in the native language, perhaps due to lack of opportunity to use and hear that native language. So we really need to delve into to understand their exposure at home, their exposure at school, the types of programming they were in, versus on the right-hand side, what you'll see are things that might indicate a possible language learning disability. So when the student is perhaps qualitatively or quantitatively, their language is different than their peer group, then we start to perhaps think of a true disability. So these are, again, for your reference. Spend the time looking at them, as I have here listed the various components of language and the types of difference and disorder that you might see across the the main concepts of language. So that's just for your use. Okay. I think I'd like a little bit of a chance here for you all to kind of process and take a moment and just throw in the chat if you have any questions or comments before we start delving into more specifically on MTSS. So give you a chance to process this a little bit. Anything that needs clarifying or comments, feedback, that's all helpful. I have not done research with SLIFE students. But I do think that the rate of learning English will have to do, again, with helping to there's two things going on with SLIFE students. It might be the rate of learning English and their acquisition of academic content. So if they don't have a strong academic formal instruction background in their home language, then they're learning new concepts as they're learning the language, which is a double cognitive load. So it will take time and a lot of intensive support. And it's not a disability. Oh, good. I'm glad you're using the text. Perceiving sounds, hearing sounds. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, brain plasticity certainly works in children learning languages more quickly, but really, again, it goes back to that foundation in the first language. So if an adult learns a second language, it's much easier to build that second language based on the firm foundation of their first language. And that's why adults are more efficient really at learning a second language. Okay, great. All right. Well, with that, I don't see any other burning questions. We'll just move on. Thank you for doing that. And we'll be taking a break in about 30 minutes, just to kind of give you a lay of the land here. Okay. So let's move into what is a culturally and linguistically responsive multi-tiered systems of support. And here you see the iconic triangle that you're probably all familiar with. The percentages of the triangle is a little off here, mostly because there's a lot of text in each of the three parts of the triangle that I want to review here. Well, actually, we'll review this in a couple of slides ahead. All right. So again, with our theme of asset-based learning principles, we're going to be looking at an ecologically driven assessment system. So based on what we know about students, and data-based decision-making with collaborative teaming. So the one thing that I always say about the one thing I love about MTSS is it is allowing us to, and it's almost forcing us to make new friends. We've been so siloed in education. And now we really need to create teams of experts with multiple backgrounds, right? To make these collaborative decisions. So we need to be, like I say, make new friends, and I love it. And it's also a multi-level prevention or proactive system that includes practices to promote language and learning support for all students, not just our multilingual learner students. So, as was mentioned in my introduction, I recently completed a model demonstration grant that had us look at the creation of a culturally and linguistically responsive MTSS model in partner schools here in Oregon. And so here I identify the various components of this. And I will show you a rubric that is free and downloadable that your system can use to self-assess your responsiveness to multilingual learners, students in your system. And school leadership and model development was a component of this. There was a school leadership team that included language specialists. We implemented the model. We provided job-embedded professional development, and you'll be seeing some of that modeled a little later in the presentation. The family engagement piece, we actually didn't get to do much work on because, gosh, a couple of years into the funding of this, what happened? Well, the pandemic. So we did not get to fully engage all of these components. There is a sustainability piece. The components that we put into place before the pandemic are now being used in the schools. Dissemination, I'll share with you the website. There's lots of free and downloadable materials for all of your use. So throughout that, we conceptualize then our model of culturally and linguistically responsive MTSS. So within this model, 80% of all students should be close to or meeting grade level expectations. We say about 15 to 20%, though, may need supplemental support. And of those, perhaps 5% of students might need intensive support. So this is sort of the, that's the standard model. What you see in our model is that here are oral language proficiency levels. So 5 levels, sometimes some states identify 6 levels of language proficiency, but these cut across each tier. So no matter if a child is in core instruction or tier 2 or tier 3 supports, that language proficiency has to be attended to in instruction and intervention. So you still have to use those ELD strategies throughout all layers of the tier in order to make sure that we are responding to the specific needs of multilingual learners. And students with disability could receive services at all levels, kind of depending on need. So and as a reminder that English language development services or ESL services, or however you label them, are really part of core instruction for students that qualify, just like reading and math are core instruction. So it's not considered an intervention, right? But those strategies are then continued across and throughout the tier. So what you see here in the outer blue, purplish blue, is a framework that I will introduce you to a little later that my colleagues and I conceived several years ago, that then help us ensure that we are culturally and linguistically responsive at all levels of the tiers as well. So here's just a little kind of organizer for what we'll be talking about the remainder of the presentation. So here's the model flipped. And what I want to really reinforce here is what we started the presentation with, is that tier 1 is the key. So tier 1 goals are very noble and represent a strong commitment to all students. However, when it comes to English learners, multilingual learners, the question regarding what constitutes quality academic instruction and supports tends to be overlooked in the most general sense. So again, we have to ensure that our core instruction meets the needs of all students, and we'll be looking at data to show, how we make these kinds of decisions and how we ensure that core is meeting the needs of all students a little later. Okay. So literacy within a multi-tiered support system has to include those foundational components of literacy that have been outlined from the National Literacy Panel, many years ago. And we're probably all familiar with those 5 key pillars, right? Phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and reading comprehension. But after the National Literacy Panel published its report, then another panel that looked specifically at literacy development for English learners also found that, yes, while those were important, language is really a key component. So oracy development or oral language development is really another pillar. Along with writing. So those 2 are crucial for multilingual learners. And the key to it all is that we're intentional about language development. And as I said earlier, ELD services, they're not an intervention, but they're part of core instruction, but not only core, those services might be part of core instruction, but the kinds of strategies used within ELD services to teach language can be included across all intervention tiers as well, and must be. Okay. So how do we do that if we're delivering intervention like tier 2 and 3 interventions to English learners? So what we found is that most of the intervention programs that you might have on your school shelves that you're using in tiers 2 and 3, which are generally scripted programs, they might include something like reading mastery, phonics for reading, read naturally. Most of those programs have not included English learners in their research base. And while we know that they are strong at teaching the components of reading, we also know that there's likely need to have more language supports and perhaps attention to background knowledge. So even, the developers and the early pioneers at MTSS, the researchers concluded that interventions may require tailoring or adjustments that include oral language and scaffolding supports, and that decisions to make the adjustments to interventions will require school level decision making. So all adjustments, though they guide, should be simple, made based on students' curriculum-based measurement data, and they should be done while maintaining the fidelity to the program's methods for learning targeted skills. So what we have developed is our PLUS framework, which I'll really unpack in depth later on, as kind of a scaffold around instruction and intervention programs, so that we're ensuring that we attend to the language and background needs, unique needs of multilingual students, while continuing to maintaining the fidelity of instruction and intervention programs. This will make a little more sense as we go along. So as a reminder on languages of interventions, I think I work with many systems that have two-way immersion programs. And so we typically recommend that the language of intervention match the language of core instruction. So in many of our two-way immersion models, kindergarten, first, second grade instruction may be in Spanish or Vietnamese, and the language of intervention should match the language of instruction. And it really isn't efficient to have it to be in two languages. We want to focus on one language. And in an English-only instructional setting, then the language of intervention is going to be in English. But again, we need to attend to providing adjustments or an overlay to those interventions that attend to the language and background needs of students. And we'll be looking at videos on how to do that a little later. Okay, so dual language and biliteracy. We are seeing an increase in dual language or biliteracy programs across the country, and we hope to continue to see that, because that does really benefit all students, not only multilingual learners, but English-only students that are able to be part of these programs from early on to be biliterate, because in a global society, we know that this is an asset academically, but also, in the economical market. So I encourage you to think about the possibility of developing more such programs within your states. Okay, let's see. Are there any comments in the chats? Or thank you, Kirsten, for putting more resources on TransLanguaging. So if you all check the chat, there's a lot of resources that'll be flowing through there that our wonderful patent people are adding along the way. So thank you.
So there is a question that came to me in a direct question here. Does Oregon have dual language programs?
Yes, we do. And we have been working with a partner district for the last about 4 years, and they do have dual immersion programs. Theirs is in Spanish. We have a district that's about half hour south of the metro area that had both Spanish English dual immersion and Russian English. So they're really one of the pioneers in the country of Russian immersion dual language programs, but it's based on their community. And we have Vietnamese English immersion programs. So I think those are the main language. I think we're working to develop some Arabic dual language programs within the Portland metro area. And they are definitely gaining popularity here. So great question. Thank you for asking. Okay.
So one more quick question, and this may be better for like after today, but the presentation and resources are excellent. And are you able to send any resources for adult ELs?
No, that is not much of my focus. I've been working in schools more, so I wouldn't have resources. I don't know if Patton has resources.
We maybe have some people we can connect you with. Sorry, Maria, go ahead.
No, you're right. And I was going to also say, if you had take the Padlet link, and after this presentation, take a look, I would direct your attention to the Literacy Council in Minnesota, and we can talk more about that then.
Great.
And one more question, are there any particular ELL curriculums that you might recommend?
No, but I will show you our plus framework of how then we can make them, more appropriate using what we have on our classroom shelves. There are some intervention programs that are in Spanish. That's the only language, and there's only a couple of them. So we are kind of behind. And again, that's why we kind of created our framework that we'll be sharing. So great questions.
Awesome. Thank
you.
I
did a time check. I think we're right on time here. So I'm going to delve into ecologically driven assessment systems. So what do I mean by this? Ecologically driven assessment systems. So we include this ecological focus, meaning the database, the data that we consider in making our database decisions consider they consider how the environmental characteristics of a student's learning environment and their home environment impacts their performance on assessments. So for example, do educators consider the language or languages of instruction, oral and written language development, and the alignment to their home and community language knowledge and English? Now, even though in your state, you may not have a lot of dual language programs, you probably have a lot of immigrant students that come with some foundational knowledge in their first language. And this is critical to know, because then it may not be interventions that they need as much as really a teaching for transfer, helping them to understand how their knowledge can transfer to English, or what they know already, what it means in English, versus having to learn both the concept and the new language for a new concept. So those are totally different instructional needs. So really learning about the backgrounds of your students can help you understand their particular needs. So that's the knowing their ecology. So to gauge the progress of multilingual learners, we suggest that comparisons be made on students who are alike. And I coined this phrase, true peers, in 2008, that we want to compare students who are alike in developmental, linguistic, cultural, and experiential dimensions, or true peers. So really, not comparing a second grader that's a multilingual learner to another second grader, that's comparing apples to mangoes, but rather comparing the multilingual learner to another multilingual learner that has a similar background. Now, that's easier to do with more common languages like Vietnamese or Spanish than some of the more recent languages of recent immigrants, for example. But we try to do, so it's not a precise concept or activity here, but we're trying to make the most appropriate comparisons that we can to determine a couple of things. And we use true peer comparisons to make two determinations. First of all, if a true peer group is making adequate progress towards grade level standards, and again, are we meeting the needs of our multilingual learners or if our instruction is not as effective as it should be by looking at true grade level standards. And also these true peer comparisons can help us determine when an individual student is making slower progress than their true peer group, and that we may need to have further individual problem solving on individuals. So this concepts will help us in two ways. Really determining when core instruction may need to be modified more, and then in determining individual students who may need a closer look. So this is an important concept that we'll be unpacking further as well. Okay, so how do we do this? So using our screening data or classroom level data, we ask the question first of, are 80% of all of our students in the class at or close to benchmark or grade level standards? Okay, so that's kind of the first cut. Where does our group, what does our screening data show us here? And then what's really important is then we disaggregate that data by student groups. So if we disaggregate the data and look at our multilingual learners within our classroom and ask that question again, are 80% of each student group at or close to benchmark? Then we might have a different answer. So if in disaggregating the data that we see that yes, in the blue here, that each group is close to meeting benchmark, then we carry on and go forth because instruction is okay. But if instead we see that specific groups of students are not achieving as our English only peers are, then we need to more closely examine instruction to ensure that there's an alignment to students' needs and learning needs and characteristics. So to do this, we do this through collaborative problem-solving teams. So here's a quote from our book, providing high-quality instruction that enables a wide range of students to each be successful is a daunting task for a classroom teacher, and therefore providing high-quality instruction must be approached as a collaborative, system-wide effort. So we need many people at the table because they will each bring their lens, knowledge, and expertise. So thinking about collaborative problem-solving teams, who needs to be at the table when planning instruction for multi-level learners? So go ahead and put those answers in the chat. I love it. Parent, yes. Speech pathologist, psychologist, classroom teacher, ELL teacher, absolutely. The entire team. Yes, but we need to sometimes reconceptualize who is on that entire team, because yes, parents, absolutely. Special ed teachers can be there, but most particularly English language development specialists, right? So our teams are expanding, and they need to be, because we do need everybody's lens there. Great, love the answers. Reading interventionists, yes. So these can be big teams. You may need to have larger spaces for these teams at your school. Great. Okay, perfect. Just checking the time. All right, so let's talk about then what kind of assessments occur within MTSS. So student level assessment data are used to match the identified needs of students with the appropriate instruction or intervention. So assessments can be summative, which most of you are going to be familiar with. They're the end of unit kinds of assessments, or even statewide assessments, and they give us one bit of information. Within MTSS, we really focus a lot on formative assessment, and that could be curriculum-based measures that are used for screening and progress monitoring, but it could also be observations by classroom teachers, by specialists, checklists, writing samples, so really kind of that more authentic assessment. And we might also use diagnostic assessments for students that we're looking more individually at as we're moving up the tiers. So all of those assessments can be used within MTSS. And we use these different assessments to make both student, class, school, and district level decisions. So within MTSS, you're likely familiar with the universal screening assessments that are generally administered 3 times per year, beginning, middle, and end. And the screening data then identifies students who may need additional assessment and instruction. And again, the screening data should be disaggregated to see how your groups of students are doing. And the screening data can then help assess the impact of your core programming for all students. So that's why it's really important to disaggregate that data. So let's talk about universal screening methods. So all students are administered screening measures to identify those who may need additional support. So that's the purpose. And screeners are quick assessments. Measures should be administered in L1 means first language and L2 second language if you're in a dual language program. And of course, screening measures will match your language or languages of instruction. So if you're an English only model, then you only need to worry about that in one language. And language proficiency should also be taken into account when interpreting scores. So sometimes that's a little tricky, like is it the language that is causing the student not to achieve or understand a task, or is it that they don't know a task? And I also want to stop and say here that there's a lot of pushback sometimes from bilingual and even our ELD specialists about screening measures such as DIBELS or EasyCBM kinds of measures being biased against multilingual learners. But it really, they are meant to be kind of like a thermometer to take a quick dip in to see what skills students need to develop in order to be literate, to be a reader in English or in the language of the screener. So if we're finding that a large group of our English learners are not doing well on a screening measure, then again, that takes us back to what does core instruction need to do to help move the dial for those students? Not that they are have disabilities or are not intelligent. Okay, so there are considerations in using screening and determining appropriate screening and assessment tools. So we want to use tools with demonstrated reliability and validity, and again, assess in the languages that match our language of instruction, and plan instruction based on what we know about our students' performance and literacy experiences that they bring with us. So what we do know is that there is a large body of research that actually speaks to the reliability and validity of curriculum-based measures, the commonly used ones with the multilingual learner population. So again, they are good at identifying the instruction that we need to target, again, for our learners. It's not saying that they lack them for any particular reason, but it's saying here's where we begin our instruction. And that's an important roadmap. So progress monitoring and diagnostic data are also key sources for decision making. Diagnostic data can also help us ensure that interventions are matched to students' need and support hypothesis development as we look at intensified instruction or who might need a potential referral to special education. But all assessments, again, must consider the appropriateness and relevance of the task, and that students really understand the tasks based on their unique cultural, linguistic, and experiential backgrounds, because students' understanding of tasks or their some often cultural misunderstandings I have seen occur in kind of assessment tasks where from perhaps collectivist kinds of cultures where, we support everybody, to sometimes teachers misperceiving that collectivist mindset to cheating by helping your neighbor with an answer on a test. So again, really understanding students' role belief will help us to understand appropriateness of assessment and instructional tasks. So this is the rubric that I told you about earlier. It's available at these websites, free, it's downloadable, and it will help you assess your system in terms of its responsiveness to multilingual or English learner students. It's about a 12-page rubric. You complete it with your school leadership team, but it really helps you to start targeting what you can do differently to ensure that you're meeting the needs of all of your students. So I invite you to download that and use it or modify it for your needs. Okay, and with that, we are right at 11:30. We're going to take a 15-minute break. You're welcome to put questions or thoughts into the chat as you take a break, and we'll see you back here in 15 minutes. Greetings. I see some questions. I see one right now. Are formative assessments the best tool to monitor ongoing language development throughout the year? Yes, and actually there's a big gap in our assessment availability regarding how to progress monitor language. We're working on a tool here with a colleague of mine, but sometimes just informal, your speech and language paths can help you with some informal kinds of language sampling, because we really don't have a kind of a nationally efficient way in which to monitor language development, other than our annual screenings and language proficiency testing that's done at the state level, which is not, it's an annual assessment, so it's not very fine-grained, right? Let's see, what tool would you recommend to help determine true peers? We've started using something, I don't know, DSTPGE. I'm not sure what that is. Any help? No? Okay. True peers, again, like I said, it's not a very precise concept. It's more the idea of trying to make the most appropriate comparisons as possible. And it might be that you have a group of 5 students that are native X language speaker that are born in the United States. They've been in that school since kindergarten. So you try to, again, match students as closely as possible to start looking at progress, group progress, and then individual progress. And we'll look at that a little more closely in a few moments. Diverse student true peer group estimator. What the heck is that? I want to know about it. That would be interesting. The model. The model can be used up to 3 times per year. Is that your assessment, the model? Kirsten or someone, what is the model?
Sorry, I'm back here. So WIDA does have the model available, which can be used for progress monitoring. So they have developed, it is a non-secured test, so unlike Access. But the advantage in using that is that it is using questions that are formatted to be very close to the actual assessment. And I've seen teachers use it a variety of ways to be flexible within the classroom to use it as formative assessments. But yeah.
Oh, I would love to see a copy of that if anybody can share it with me. I learned something new from every presentation that I do too. So thank you. This is awesome to share back and forth. Okay. introduced it as professional development, the WIDA. So Sam, somebody put in there that you saw a presentation from Sam. So just a little tidbit about that. Sam was a school psychology intern a good 30 years ago when I first met him, and I was the bilingual special ed specialist for a district, a very small district in Southern California. So we have grown up through these fields together. He's a good friend of mine. So funny. Okay, thanks so much. We're back. I hope you had a good break. 15 minutes is very short, but we have another second half here, and let's delve into all of these issues a little bit more deeply. So this will be a pretty interactive portion of the presentation. So hopefully that'll help keep you awake as it's getting later on your Friday afternoon. So we're going to talk about data meetings, and data meetings are then where we use this problem-solving approach. And I'm sure this is not new to all of you, but that approach has these 4 components. It's like, hey, what is the problem? What's occurring here? Why is a problem occurring? What do we plan to do about it? And then planning our response, and then coming back and evaluating how is it working. So that's the mindset around our data meetings. Now, in our MTSS models here in Oregon, and I think I did see a question about a school district, if I knew of one that had a good functioning MTSS framework happening. And yes, that's it's not a large district, but our partner district that we have been working with for several years, Tiger Tualatin School District, and I'm going to put that in the chat. Tiger Tualatin School District has a pretty well-developed model. You know, of course, there's always room for improvement, but what I'm sharing with you is kind of their model and what we've been working on with them. So I know that I think are expecting guests from Australia pretty soon, and they have, you know, they are well known for their models. So take a look at them. So there's 3 different kinds of data meetings that occur within our framework of MTSS. And the first starts with what we call 100% meetings. And these 100% meetings are held 3 times a year. So at the end of fall, at the end of winter, and in the springtime. And as you can see, our team here includes, you know, it's a broad team, like we discussed a bit ago, that include ELD specialists, Title I and literacy specialists, special education teachers, speech language counselors. So we have a broad team because we will look at academic support needed as well as behavioral. And we look at the screening data that first helps us determine the health of core, or is core effective for all groups of students, and the strengths of core at each grade level. And if we find that it needs some tweaking, then we determine ways of adjusting the curriculum, the instruction, or the environment when data shows that it's needed. And then language assessment data is also included in these review meetings. They're provided by the ELD specialist, and it's important. It's a critical component of the planning process. So lots of data. We're really using a broad team to ask questions about core and individual students. So those are 100% meetings. So core instruction, again, is prioritizes meeting the needs of about 80% of all students and student groups. We disaggregate the data to make sure that we're not leaving any group behind. And then after that, we examine student data to determine which individual students might need interventions. And then we make intervention group assignments determined by the specific skills that students need support in. The groups are heterogeneous groups that might include English learners with English only students, but again, grouped by skill, literacy skill. So we disaggregate the student data to gauge, again, the effectiveness of core for all students. So we analyze which students are falling in the intensive need range, first asking the question, are there instructional misalignments or is it an individual student problem? So if we see a large group of English learner students that are identified as needing intensive support, that always takes us back to core. So we're not like taking the whole EL student group and saying, oh, their data shows that they need, all of this group needs tier 2 support. Well, no, the first question has to be if a group really needs a more specifically aligned core instruction. Okay. Contents also is analyzed for its cultural relevance, because it's not just language that has to be attended to in the instruction of multilingual learners, but for all students, really the cultural relevance. Now, for monolingual, monocultural students, that cultural relevance can be assumed because that's built into the core, the fabric of our curriculum. But we have to be much more intentional about finding books and other curricular materials that where students can see themselves. It really does matter that students see others like them in their instructional materials. Okay, and then when linguistic and cultural supports are in place in core instruction, then, your screening and assessment data can be reliably used with multilingual students to identify those who might need intensive support, more intensive support, whether it's tier 2 or 3, than students from their, when we use true peer comparisons. And the essential question then to answer is core instruction differentiated to align with English learner students' linguistic, cultural, and experiential backgrounds, so as to determine that students' challenges are not the result of lack of appropriate educational opportunities. And this becomes really critical if we have to go down the line to a special ed referral, because special education laws tell us that we cannot determine the student has a disability if the major determinant to that is the lack of appropriate educational opportunities. So we want to take care of that early on, because that might actually be the issue for many of our students. So that is the essential question. Okay, so that's 100% meetings. So once we've determined who are going to be in our intervention groups, then we also hold regular 3 times a year meetings to monitor students' progress in those intervention groups. And again, it's a broad collaborative team that meets to determine, who needs additional support or if the intervention needs to be modified. So teams examine data for each intervention group to see how the group is doing, how individuals are doing, making true peer comparisons, and looking at grade level norms. And we might make instructional adjustments to the interventions. We might change the targets. We might change the methods or the curriculum. So we, again, look at the data that will help guide us to any changes that need to be made. And then there might be students whose data shows they require more intentional support. So then we might refer those students to the individual problem-solving team. So the next level of support. So individual problem-solving teams, then at this point, we will make sure that we include parents. Now, parents are included in terms of they know at each level where their student is currently falling in the data, in their progress, whereas parents may or may not attend those previous meetings. At the problem-solving level, we definitely attend in person with the teams. So if students did not make expected progress in tier 2 and they demonstrated more intensive need, so we might refer them to this individual problem solving. So it's not special education, but it's individual problem solving. So it's more focused on the individual needs of the students. We make sure that we have the most information we can about their backgrounds, developmental milestones and such. So therefore, a developmental history and parent interview would likely take place prior to the meeting so that then we can review all of this data. And we'll track a student at 9-week or so intervals, perhaps more sooner if there's an intensive need. So this is a delicate dance here. So we want to ensure that students have ample opportunity to respond to intensive interventions, but we also don't want to have intensive interventions occur for a year or, a great length of time if we're not seeing progress before we might consider a special education referral. So we want to give ample time for the interventions to work, but we don't want to extend that time in case we're missing a true disability need. So the more data we have, then that helps us make those kinds of decisions. Okay, so let's look at some examples of when I say we make true peer comparisons. What does that look like? So I'm starting here with, this is specific to dual language programs, and I understand there's not that many in your state, but I want to just make us aware that if students are receiving instruction in 2 languages, we need to look at the totality of their literacy knowledge base. And so that is using side-by-side data to make profiles of students to understand their knowledge, their literacy skills across their 2 languages. Because, for example, if we have a student that is immigrated here and is, for example, down here, if you can see my arrow, they're on grade level on their Spanish scores, but perhaps in the red zone in English, then they're not a student who really needs tier 3 interventions. They're a student that needs to understand how their literacy skills in their native language work within the rules of their new language. So that's a different kind of profile than a student who is in the intensive zone across 2 languages. So if this applies to you, you can reach out to me for more information. But again, just to really understand that we need to have a knowledge of our students' skills across their languages. And this is going to be important, particularly important for kids that have immigrated into your schools. Okay, so now we're going to look at kind of some true peer comparisons and answer the question of, well, what's adequate progress? How do we determine this? So the red dotted line here is the classroom or grade level aim line. And here I have a student that we call Egberto, and I show 3 different lines of progress for him. So this first green line shows him in comparison to English speakers that are up here, right? So there's a gap. So that might be a question of, what does his core instruction look like? Because there is a big difference in between. He's making comparable progress in terms of slope, but we need to close a gap. Here he's making less progress, lower and slower progress. And here he's really making less progress than English speakers. Why is this happening? So the standard that should be used to evaluate his progress to determine if he's responding to intervention, that's going to determine if we are looking at instructional need or disability needs. So let's look a little more closely. Here's again the grade level aim line. The blue line is the EL student group. We've disaggregated the data. Here's the group data for English learners within one classroom. Now, where the slope may be similar, are they going to close the gap at the rate that they are progressing to meet grade level benchmarks? You can throw that into chat. Are they going to meet grade level benchmarks, the whole EL group? They're the blue dotted line. Good. Not at this rate, right? So something has to happen to the instruction for this whole EL group. We have to make more intentional our specific and language supports and teaching the language of the instruction, right? And ensuring that there's cultural relevance. So something needs to be adjusted in core here. But the question here was 2 students were referred for potential special education referral. Chasito, who's the purple line, and Panchito, who is represented by the green line. So let's look at Panchito's progress. Is his progress commensurate with the progress of his true peer group? Yes or no? Or similar? Yes, it's pretty close to his true peer group, right? So, but he's below grade level. So he needs to be addressed, but this can be addressed within that. We have to address the progress of the entire English learner group here because they are not going to close the gap. So something has to happen to make a change in core instruction so that these students can become closer to closing that gap, right? But look at Panchito. Is his progress markedly different than his true peer group? Yes or no? Yes. In this case, we might look individually more closely at Panchito's progress and his situation because, excuse me a moment. Excuse me. Because his progress is markedly different than his true peer group. So looking at the data disaggregated in this way is going to do 2 things for us. It's going to be really a program evaluation of how effective core instruction is to a particular group of students, in this case, our multilingual learners, and to help us tease out those multilingual learners who might need a closer look at in terms of their individual progress. But we're not going to say that, oh, look at how low this whole EL-ML group is, so they all need tier 2 interventions. No, core needs the intervention. Okay. Now, again, by making comparisons to the 2 peer groups really gives us an idea of the health of core and also of which individuals might need us to look more closely into. Okay, so basically we went over this. So I want you to, let's look at the red here. To avoid bias, comparison to other true peer English learners is necessary for any diagnostic questions related to possible disorder or disability. And it may also add information related to instructional needs and intervention. So to close out this little section, I want us to think about, is special ed the answer? Because I know often as a classroom teacher, you might be really overwhelmed and think, well, this student's needs are far greater than I can answer. Let's just turn them over to special education. But really, at the end of the day, special education can't solve the problems that are rooted in general education. So we have to really look carefully at what the data is showing us in terms of adjusting core and then looking individually at student needs. So, okay, thoughts? Just take a moment to process those, throw any thoughts or questions into the chat. I'll take a look at that, and then we're going to move on to some instructional issues. So, okay, thoughts, comments, questions. I'll give you a moment. Hope you're still there. I don't see any comments. Special education can't take the place. I will put that slide back up. Cannot solve problems that are rooted in general education. So Angela, thank you for asking for that. Oh, all EL students. So true peer groups, again, are going to be as close a match as possible. So all Spanish speakers or Vietnamese speakers or whatever, we're making the closest match possible so that we're comparing, mangoes to mangoes, not a mixture. And sometimes that's hard if we only have one family that speaks a particular language. Then we might look to other English learners with similar backgrounds. It's really, sometimes it may not be possible to have a true peer group. And a true peer comparison might only consist of 3 or 5 students. Yes, a true disability will be apparent in both L1 and L2, but we may not have the ability to really be able to understand what that looks like in the first language. But yes, a disability is going to happen in L1, L2, L3, L10, whatever. Yes. Okay. All right. If there's no other thoughts or comments, so what do you do when you don't have a true peer group? Yeah, you try to do the best comparisons as possible. And you do a lot of digging into background and understanding, any kinds of issues that the parents can identify that may not be apparent in school records. I had a student once that I assessed in high school, which is really odd when you get a referral, special ed referral in high school. But for years, the schools were trying to figure out what was going on with the student who had immigrated from Vietnam when he was like in 4th grade, on, and he just had struggles. But not until 10th grade did anybody do a parent interview to find that the parents said that even in Vietnamese, he didn't start speaking till he was the age of 4, and that they have to translate to their relatives and friends. They have to interpret for him because even other Vietnamese speakers couldn't understand him. So he really had a language-based disability that no one caught for years because no one talked to the parents. No, we couldn't test him in both languages, but I used an interpreter. So we did, there were no tools available in Spanish, but we did work with an interpreter. And so understanding school records, but you can get so much more from parent interviews. Do those early on. Okay. Right, thank you. We're going to move on now. All right. So now we're going to really kind of look at instruction, and I'm going to introduce you to the framework that my colleague Amanda Sanford and our former student Miranda Turner developed years ago as a scaffold or an overlay to intervention programs. So our PLUS framework, what we did is we culled the literature for best practices in the instruction of multilingual or English learners. So you'll see the research evidence here in the green, and our PLUS components, we basically clumped them into this acronym PLUS. We can't spell, so PLUS has 2 S's, and here's what each component stands for. pre-teach, critical language, and prime background knowledge. So we provide language supports that might include explicit instruction in all language components at the word and sentence level to understand passages or units of instruction. And we make sure to build background knowledge because background knowledge is critical for reading comprehension. We can't miss that piece. Language modeling and opportunities for practice. So we make sure that we provide appropriate models of the use of academic language and structured opportunities for students to practice using that language in meaningful contexts. You use visuals and graphic organizers. We use pictures, graphic organizers, gestures, real objects, and other visual prompts to make critical language, concepts, and strategies comprehensible to everybody. Systematic and explicit instruction. So we use the I do, we do, you do format. And that is usually the type of instruction that is included in the intervention programs. The scripted programs are developed in this way anyway. So often the intervention program is this systematic and explicit instruction piece anyway. And then the second S, strategic use of native language and teach for transfer. So as you saw in our earlier example of Neto, the use of cognates and videos or in native language and bridging languages is a really important tool that we want to build into instruction as well. So that's our PLUS framework. Now, how do we apply it? So for one thing, here is a resource for you, a free ebook that's available in English and Spanish that goes more into depth outlining each of the components, and it provides a blank lesson plan template for you. So feel free to look at those and download those if you find those useful. Okay, so in the earlier handouts that our colleagues provided you the links to, you were given something that should look like this, the video self-reflection form. If you were able to print that out, you should bring that out and put that next to your computer. If not, just a blank piece of paper will work as well for what we're going to do next. Okay. So on this form, there's two sides of it. And on the front side, you'll see our PLUS features here and some examples of what that might look like for each of these features, and a place to notate what features you actually saw and whether they were not in place, partially in place, or fully in place. So what we're going to do is we use this model as a self-observation reflection protocol. So what we found was, while we created this model as an overlay to intervention programs, it really resonated with general education or core instruction teachers. So we developed this process where we had general education teachers deliver a lesson to a group of English learner students, videotape themselves, and then they watched the video of their own instruction and they rated what they saw in terms of these PLUS features that they used. And so it was only a self-reflection. They didn't need to share it with anybody, but they then were really honing in on how effectively they were using these features in their instruction. The backside of the form then, they looked at their video a second time to observe the opportunities that they were giving for their own students to respond, because student response in the use of language is really critical to language development. And what we know from research is that, 80% of classroom instruction is teacher talk, and we need to flip that. It needs to be student talk and opportunities for them to respond either in whole group, in pairs, or individually. So then we ask students or our teachers to rate how many times students responded in their instructional video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unpack now these plus components, but then we're going to, all of us are going to watch some instructional videos, and then I'm going to ask you to both rate the plus features that you see within the videos, and then rate the kinds of opportunities to respond that you also see in the videos. So we'll be doing some video reflection in a moment after we unpack each of the components here. Okay, so let's look more specifically at what each of these components could look like. So pre-teach critical vocabulary and prime background knowledge. So it could look like an example. Here is a Freyer model that if you're in the ESL field, I think this is a really well-known strategy. It's a graphic organizer that helps students determine or clarify the meaning of vocabulary words that they encounter while listening, reading, and viewing texts. It can be used like as to activate background knowledge or during reading. So it's a very useful. And there's one example of something that could fall under pre-teach critical vocabulary and priming background knowledge. Okay, let's see. The second component, L, language modeling and opportunities for using academic language. An example is the use of sentence frames or sentence starters, because they provide really high impact when paired with opportunities for students to then practice using those. Now, sometimes I will get pushback on the use of sentence frames, like it's too much of a crutch for students. They should learn to respond independently. But again, it's a scaffold, and it's a scaffold that will then be we'll need it less and less as students have more develop their proficiency, but they first need practice. And I will also share that, even in academia, I have some scaffolds of academic language frames that have been shared with professors that help us to begin our thinking about writing. So scaffolds and frames are used in all academic contexts, and it's not a crutch. They can be really useful to students as they're developing our language. So here's some example. What are sentence frames? So at the beginning level of language development, we might create simple sentence frames. Oranges are sweet, lemons are sour, and or a comparative sentence. At the higher levels, oranges and lemons are both fruits, but oranges are sweets and lemons are sour. And at a higher language proficiency level, the main difference between oranges and lemons is oranges are sweet while lemons are sour. So you'll see how language becomes more sophisticated. So we meet where students are at, maybe a little higher, create sentence frames. We can then give them key word banks to choose words that fit into the blanks and then have them practice. So here are the kinds of structures that then we provide for them, give them targeted words they can fill in the blanks. More complex sentence frames. There's many examples that you can look up on the internet, and I'm sure Rita has a lot of examples of sentence frames, but just to give you an idea of what those look like. So they're easy to use and they should be used. Some more examples kind of at an elementary level. Here on the right-hand side, you'll see you can, again, scaffold kind of the sophistication of a word and give choices. Great. And this neighborhood is probably first, second grade. All right. So thinking about those components, we're going to now look at an example of a lesson that I would like you then to rank what you see in terms of the plus components. This lesson takes place in a general education classroom. It's a little bit hard to hear. I'm sorry about the quality of the video. We are trying to redo some of these videos, take new videos with better sound quality, but you still should be able to hear it. So I'm going to put that on for you now. Stop share that. Go to the video. And what happened to it? Okay, here we go. So here's what you're going to be looking for. Okay, sorry. Let me get to this again. Wrong one. Video. There we go. There's no sound right now.
And Dr. Brown, we're still seeing your slide.
Oh my. Thank you for telling me. This better? Can you see the video now?
Yes.
Thank you. We blurred out student faces, but watch in general education classroom.
Ready? I believe the word discouraged. Repeat.
I believe the word discouraged
Fits best with because go.
fits best with because
Nicely done. You are going to put your discouraged in visible or invisible. Remember, visible means you can see it. Can you see discouraged? Invisible means you cannot see it. Discouraged. If you feel helpless. Put it thumbs up or pack shows me you have it in a spot. If you need help spelling discouraged, it's on the board. All right, you're telling your salt and pepper partner, salt, you're going to start. I believe the word discouraged fits best with because ready, set, go.
I believe discouraged fits best in the I believe discouraged fits best in the I believe the word discouraged fits best in visible side because
Pack's telling me salt and pepper have said their sentence.
I believe discouraged fits best in the invisible side because if someone is like feeling like unhappy, you can like help them and stuff.
Can you see it on your face sometimes?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
So is it visible?
Oh.
All right, here we go. We're going to push in our chairs. We're going to stand up. We're going to move. Here we go. Walk, walk, walk until you hear the sound. Now remember, we can agree and disagree with our partners. If you also put it invisible, agree or disagree. Back to your seats. Let's do it in 4. Chop, chop. Chop, chop. This sentence. I believe discouraged. If I have discouraged spelled right on the board, you have it spelled right. Starting at that pink line. I believe the word discouraged.
Okay. So now if you throw in the chat, what did you see? What components of plus did you see? Priming and pre-teaching, sentence frames, modeling, great. Language use modeling. And the example of the student where she leaned down and asked about visible and invisible, that student was a multilingual learner on an IEP. So she gave specific support, and this is an inclusive environment. Many opportunities to respond, and that's the key, isn't it? But they were not, but they were partnered responses where she also monitored that each pair, each partner in the pair had an opportunity to respond, because what we often see is if we don't monitor that carefully, English learners will be the silent ones, the silent pair, right? So visuals on an iPad, spelling on the board, language, yes. So very language rich environment, a lot of checking in. So that's what we want to see. And you saw the use of those sentence frames that then really help students give the scaffolds for everybody to respond. All right, I'm going back to our PowerPoint. Great. All right, so you also saw the use of visuals and graphic organizers, but that can look like more than that. Illustrated word walls, framed outlines, storyboards, movie clips. So we want to, again, give as much multimodal support as possible, which also aligns with the concept of universal design for learning. Graphic organizers can look like this and also have sentence frames included with them. So combining different supports. So what is the concept that we're teaching here in this with these sentence structures, sentence starters or sentence frames? What grammatical concept are we teaching? What do you see? Past tense, that's right. Okay, so you notice the skill that they're teaching there. Here's what some anchor charts might look like, other visuals. And then the next component is systematic and explicit instruction. And as I said earlier, that actually might be your intervention program, which includes explain, model, guided practice, and feedback. But if you're not using a scripted program, you can still use this methodology where I do. So you teach it, you provide opportunities to do as a group, and then individual opportunities. Okay. And strategic use of native language and teaching for transfer, the next piece. Again, using cognates, dual language glossaries, translanguaging, scaffolding with native language. I recently heard of a teacher who pulled out his phone after giving a set of instructions, found a translation app, and then played that translation for a newcomer in his classroom so he could understand it in his native language. There are so many ways now with technology that we're able to really on the spot do supports. This is what a dual language glossary could look like. They're great when students develop them on their own as well. Here's an example of a student or class developed one. And here's just a little time for fun. So I want to talk about false cognates. So while we think about cognates that are the same word or very similar across two languages, there are also something called false cognates. So let's take a little test here. So the cognate or the word in Spanish, constipado, what do you think that might mean? You can put that in the chat. What might that mean in English? You might not want to type it, but okay. So some of you might already know what that means, but look, just take a guess. It really means, in Spanish, it means to have a cold. So it doesn't mean constipated. Okay, here's a really common one that even when I wasn't so fluent in Spanish, because I am not a native Spanish speaker, I'm a third generation Mexican American, that I misused. So what do you think embarazada means? What is embarazada? Knowing your knowledge of English, what do you think that means in Spanish? Embarrassed. Well, that's what I thought it meant too. Drunk. Oh, I like that. Here's what it really means. You ready? To be pregnant. You don't want to make that mistake. Okay, the next one, carpeta. What do you think that really means in Spanish? Okay, it might be carpet, but it means folder. Somebody got that right. Yep. How about excitado? Excitado. What do you think that means based on your knowledge of English and cognates? Exit. That's what it seems like, but it means, okay, it's a little off, a little R, but okay. Next one, culo. What does that mean? Bottom or butt, yeah. This one is important to know. Molestar. What do you think that means? Molestado. Okay, I'm glad that a lot of you understand that as bother, because here's what happens. Sometimes I have been in schools where I've heard a student say, oh, me está molestando. And thinking of cognates, then the teams will say, oh my God, this is something to take really seriously, because we will interpret that as molest, when it really just means to bother or annoy, or as somebody said, to bug somebody. So that's an important one to know. Pariente, what do you think that means? Yeah, family members, not parents. Yeah, and you get the idea here. And you can look at those at your own later on. But to understand that while there are cognates, there's also such things as false cognates. I used to have a dictionary just of false cognates, so you can find those lists easily on the internet. All right, so let's get through those and move on. Okay. So going back to your little forms, we're going to watch another video example of a comprehension lesson with the same teacher, but a different lesson, but within the same unit. And this is a summarizing lesson. So I want you now to respond looking both at, or you decide if you want to respond to, take a tally of the kinds and the numbers of student responses, or you can highlight the plus features. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that. Whoops, to the video. And can somebody tell me whether you can see the video?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay. So we provided the English language proficiency standards here.
If you're a homeowner in Oregon,
That is not the one I want. So let me stop that.
It may just be a commercial on, like it's got 4 seconds of an advertisement. So we may just have to go through those 4 seconds to get to it.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome to this
I'm
video
gonna
on
stop that
5
and
tips for
try this
creating a
again.
secure relationship with yourself.
That is
I'm your
not-
host, Dr. Donnelly Snipes.
Yeah, it's the wrong one. So how do I get out of this?
Secure relationship with
Ugh.
ourselves helps us feel safe.
Not what I wanted. Okay. Let's go back to my PowerPoint. Thank you for bearing with me all. You can maybe take a little stretch break. This should do it. Are you seeing the video again? Yes? Somebody?
Not yet.
Okay. There we go. Now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So here's what to look for. Lots of things, plus features.
where we are. We're going to start by close reading this. So you're going to say the word when I stop. Paragraph 6. Here we go. Later that night, when Mama took Jose into bed, her sweet voice echoed in the darkness. Sora, sora, so. Say it.
Sora, sora, so.
Sora, so. Say it.
Sora, so.
Nicely done. The night, Jose,
Dream
of the.
boy.
All right, circle the hoop. We know who it is. Circle it. Circle the hoop. Find out who is our main character. And what's important about this paragraph right now? What did he do?
He's dreaming about the bullfight.
He's dreaming about the bullfight. So what are you underlining, boys and girls? Dreaming about the bullfight. Yep. Eyeballs back in the text. Here we go. 7. Paragraph 7. One day when
Jose
was
5.
he saw
Government.
what's that word?
Government.
Soldiers.
Marching.
What's that word?
Marching.
Much better. In the
Street.
a
Civil
war had
broken
out in
Mexico.
Jose
Slung
a
stick
over his
shoulders.
and marched through the
House.
Good, we're gonna count in Spanish. This is uno, dos. Say it. Ready, go.
Uno,
So
dos.
count 1, 2. Okay. I want you to circle the who. Has our who changed?
No.
No, our who has not changed. Now, yikes, something really important happened in this paragraph. To his family and Jose, I want you to put your finger on it before you underline. What is really important that just happened? Nice job, guys. What is really important that just happened?
I'm going to fast forward this a little bit so you can see a little later in the lesson.
Tell your partner, I can conclude. How does he feel right now? Ulysses, what can you conclude?
I conclude that Jose is going after a civil war.
Jude, what can you conclude?
I can conclude that Jose is feeling horrified right now.
All right, here we go. Back in the text. Paragraph 8.
Okay. All right, so what did you see? Put in the chat. What did you observe? Or how many opportunities did you hear that students had to respond? And is this the normal response rate that you see in classrooms? So. Let's see. Over 20. Ooh, good. You saw repetition, check in with students, a lot of lecture. Actually, what she was doing wasn't lecture, it was close reading. So she was reading out loud and the students were then asked to kind of read the words that she left off at. But it was teacher talk, although there were many opportunities for students to respond. Use of sentence frames, open-ended statements, mostly student talk. There was a lot of opportunities for students to talk. And if you notice the quality of some of those sentences that the students, this was 3rd grade, many English learner students, they were really high quality, complete sentences. So choral and open-ended response was plentiful. I do, we do, you do, absolutely. So It's a noisy classroom for sure, but the students are really engaged in the instruction, and there's many opportunities for them to respond. And again, here's the use of the PLUS framework within a general education classroom to ensure that we are making those connections for our English learners. Okay. And here's an example of how we completed the self-reflection protocol based on this lesson. And you can look at that later at your leisure. Right. Looking at the time, we just have a few more minutes. I'm going to model another strategy that might be useful to you, something called repeated reading. Now, I'm sure most of you have used or know about the repeated reading process here. And we've modified it a little bit to be more, I want to say, aligned to the needs of English learners. So a regular repeated reading process that you may be using already is to support the development of fluency or automaticity with struggling readers. Now, so that happens by we choose a passage of maybe 50 to 200 words, and we have students repeatedly read it until they develop, success in terms of we set a level of fluency for speed and accuracy. However, the question for me has always been, well, we are really emphasizing fluency, but what about comprehension? And that's what we need to get to with for our English learners. And this really came to bear upon me when I had a student come to me in September, the beginning of our term, and she said, oh, I just met with my, X grade students in reading groups after the long summer. And I said to students, all right, students, let's read. And they responded, how fast? And that is not the point of reading. It's about comprehension. So we have then modified this process. And we call it language-focused repeated reading. And see, here you have our modification of the simple view of reading. And if the goal is reading comprehension, language has to be a piece of it. Language is going to interface with reading accuracy and fluency to get us to comprehension. And comprehension, again, is the key. The goal is not automaticity and fluency for its sake alone, but really, again, to allow cognitive space for students to comprehend what they're reading. So this language-focused repeated reading is for students who are low in fluency, but have some accuracy. So this is not the beginning decoder. So they might be students who struggle with fluency due to vocabulary knowledge or lower reading comprehension. So you'll see how we build in this language piece in our example here. So if students can read independently and answer comprehension questions proficiently, they might not need this strategy. But for those that do, again, you select an appropriate passage at their reading level between 50 and 200 words. So it's something that they can read with 90 or 95% accuracy already. And you attend to what both students can decode and what they understand in terms of word meaning, because if the topic is totally unfamiliar, the decoding and vocabulary level should be a little easier. Or if it's a more familiar topic, then you can have it be a little more difficult for them to decode and some more advanced vocabulary. So you want to attend to those aspects. And so pre-teach vocabulary explicitly and quickly. So you'll see that here in a video I'm going to share. And I have to go through this rigmarole of, there we go, finding the video.
It's nice to unwind after a long week of telling people how
Liberty Mutual customizes your car insurance so you only pay for what you need.
he's a natural.
Only pay for what you need.
Okay. We did a lot of difference today.
You saw their season.
Okay, got rid of that one. Back to my slide. Okay. Back to my share. Where is it? Ah, can you see it on the screen?
Here we go. First, put your finger on the word fuel. First word, everybody say fuel.
Okay, fuel is something that supplies power. Okay, so look right here at me. So if you have your fuel that fuels your body is food and water. That gives you energy. Think for a minute. What kind of fuel do we put in our car? What kind of fuel do we put? Put your finger up when you know something. What kind of fuel do we put in the car? What do we put in there, Dudley? Gas. So gas is fuel for the car, right? Everybody say fumes. So fumes, remember, are those it's either gas or a chemical that goes in the air. Remember, is it good to breathe? No, it's dangerous to breathe. Does it smell good? No. No, we learned that yesterday. It kind of smells bad. Yes.
The gas that comes out of the car.
It's like the exhaust that comes out of the exhaust pipe out of the car. It's the chemicals, the fumes that come out of the car, right? Everybody say fumes.
Fumes.
Fumes. Okay, here we go. Everybody finger down. Next word, here we go. Everybody say cruise. Now, show me like this. We're going to be cruising in our car. Everybody cruise. Come on, Jose. You can cruise a tiny bit. Yeah, I like it. Like cruising. Okay, so you guys, if you cruise, you travel smoothly. Okay. Looking at that, when you get an idea, just kind of put your finger up. I predict we will read about. Alexa, what do you think?
Okay. So in that you saw that she pre-taught words. Now this was a read naturally intervention lesson that you may be familiar with that product. These were all English learners in a reading intervention program. You saw that she provided student-friendly definitions and used total physical response or visual. She pulls up her phone in later lessons, but she spends time really developing those vocabulary concepts. So there's two ways that we develop vocabulary or that we teach vocabulary. One might be through an explicit vocabulary routine where we teach deeply to increase word knowledge and to have students use them in speaking and writing. Now, we do that for high utility words, so words that they're going to encounter frequently across the content areas. It's a comprehensive routine with explicit steps and review, but what you see her using in these videos is more the quick pre-teach of vocabulary. So she's not teaching them deeply. They don't have a lot of opportunities for practice, but it's important for them to have this knowledge base enough for them to understand the passage that they're going to be working on. Okay, so next they're going to make a prediction. And then she uses a sentence frame. And let's see the video of how that's used. And I'll stop share the, must be an easier way. Okay, here it goes.
Looking at that, when you get an idea, just kind of put your finger up. I predict that we will read about. Alexa, what do you think? I predict that we will read about cars. Yeah, what do you think? Say it. I predict that we will read about.
Sound.
You remember what those are called? Dune buggies. Dune buggies. I predict that we will read about dune buggies. Go, Jasmine.
I predict that we will read about
Okay, so she provides a sentence frame to make a prediction that helps support those English learners in the group. We're going to skip that. Then she has them do a cold read where they basically will, they'll each time themselves for a minute reading, they graph their score, and then they'll regraph their score at the end of the lesson to see their growth. This one highlight unknown words is an important component that, again, we've added to this repeated reading because we know students will encounter words that they may not know, and it's not okay to teach them to skip over the words. You know, we need to help them understand that reading is for comprehension. So I will share that here. Okay. Read and highlight unknown words. And we tell the students they're words you can't read or words you don't know the meaning of.
Already doing it. We are going to highlight words that we're going to highlight words that we can't read, okay, that we're having trouble reading. I can't pronounce saying like I can't, yes, that I can't read, or if I don't know what the word, what it means. If I can't pronounce it or if I don't know what it means, those are the words I'm going to highlight. Yes, thank you, ma'am. Okay, so I'm highlighting two types of words. We'll say, what are they? If I can't pronounce it and if I don't know what. I can't read it and if I don't know what it means. Good, ready? Start reading, go. Whisper read, highlight words that I can't read and don't know what they mean.
Okay. And again, that's a very important to this process of really emphasizing comprehension. So what did you see? Did I skip? Wait, did I skip a video? Nope. Here we go. So how does this have benefit for student learning? So I'm going to stop share now and ask. We're running out of time. There are more components to this, but you get the idea of how we might take a standard intervention lesson and put scaffolds around it so that it really is about teaching reading for comprehension as they're developing their fluency. So what were the benefits that you saw, or yes, it does generalize to all classes, and what it also generalizes for students with disabilities, right? And or those of the intersection disabilities who are English learners. So it's always about the kinds of supports that we put around instruction and intervention to ensure that students are having full access to content. And then that helps us make decisions as to difference in disability. Otherwise, without attending to all of these needs, we can't assure that students have had access to instruction before making these individual determinations later on down the line. Okay, so other comments here, generalizes to all classes. Yes, feel free to write some more comments in there. I'd love to read them. And we're going to return to here our PowerPoint.
I saw some people included self-monitoring as well as metacognition.
Yep, and then we also talk about prosody, punctuation. So there's a lot that we can add and include before we get to this final hot read, and we saw a lot of progress. And then we want to ensure that we have a comprehension check, and that's actually built into this intervention program. There are comprehension questions. We might add some different ones. We also might ask students to write a summary and provide some scaffolded instruction for summarizing. Here's some examples and some resources for you that we won't have time to delve into carefully, but they're here for you. And I'd like to think about, what you learned, so we can a sentence frame here. One aspect I appreciated about today's session was, so this is about your learning. What is it you learned? And I really want to know, what will you take away, at least one practice that you can apply to teaching on Monday? So if you will please bear with me and write into the chat, would be great. Quick teaching vocabulary with TPR, sentence frames, awesome. Great, keep it coming in the chat. Data graphics, I'm glad that was helpful. Good. Use the rubric to evaluate tier 1 instruction. Awesome. True peer comparisons. I'm glad that that resonated. Great. The protocol you can use or modify that however you want. So all of this material is for your use. Oh, great. Great. Okay, so thank you for responding in the chat. That is really helpful. Give you some, so last word here for ELs to be successful. Every school needs robust systems that provide culturally and linguistically responsive instruction, interventions, and assessment. Every teacher needs to understand the impact of second language acquisition on learning new concepts, and you got to experience that a little today. And it's with this grounding that fair and equitable decisions regarding support and educational programming for ELs or MLs will be made. Here's some websites for you to look at. Our newest website for our newest grant. Take a look at that, Project Le, that has the rubric on, and there's 5 free briefs on there. There's videos, the videos that you saw today and others. There's the plus ebooks that are free and downloadable on this website as well. So please explore those and download anything that you would like. There's an additional website that also has the same products, the cover of my recently co-authored book. Here's the briefs that are available at this URL. They're free and downloadable. So there's lots of resources for you. And as a reminder, we have 2 more sessions upcoming. The second session will be February 17th on instruction and assessment, more in depth across the tiers. And then session 3 on Friday, March 24th, using student psychologies for effective instruction in general and special education. And we'll be continuing throughout those sessions to really be delving into this difference in disability issue. And with that, I think we're about out of time. But hopefully this was helpful to you. And thank you for spending your afternoon with me. It's been awesome to be with you all. So thank you so much. And I'll turn it back to Patton.
All right. Well, we really want to extend our gratitude to Dr. Esparza Brown for sharing her expertise on MLs with us today. The resources, tools, and examples were extremely beneficial. This has truly been such an informative session, and I know that I'm looking forward to our following sessions here as well. I think we do have some time to take a couple questions. We have a couple minutes remaining if we want to do that.
Oh, okay, great. You're right. I was thinking it ended at 1, it's actually 1:15, right? Okay, great. So the first one, will you elaborate on the progress monitoring system you're working on? Did I hear that correctly? I think you were referring to progress monitoring for language that I was referring to. Well, we're in the development stage of figuring out narratives, perhaps to help classroom teachers monitor languages. I don't have a lot to report on that. It's kind of early on, but it sounds like WIDA has something to help you progress monitor language, and I want to delve into that more specifically. So great. So let's see what else in the chat. I'm glad there were helpful tools to you. So go ahead and throw any questions in that you have that we have a few minutes to respond to. Good resource to assess home language proficiency. Well, I mean, basically, just that's a tough one in terms of, for Spanish, that might be pretty easy. For other languages, there aren't a lot of tools developed out there yet. So oftentimes we might use an interpreter or work with community culturally specific agencies to help us gather language samples and to compare those to somebody knowledgeable of the language can help us determine whether that seems to be kind of common use, average use. Getting a developmental profile from parents can also help us determine if there were gaps or delays in language. It's not a great answer. I don't have a real specific hard and fast rule for that as we become more language diverse in this nation. And I think it's something that our field definitely needs to attend to, but it's a good question. Okay. Code for the session in the chat. That must be for you all. Is it the code for the next session? Okay, great. Do we get Act 48? I think
Yes.
that's okay, great. So some of you are getting
Yes.
some credits for this. I'm glad after all this time you've spent listening to me.
Yeah, in order to obtain Act 40 credits, you must complete the survey. Kirsten will place the link in the chat, or you can use the QR code that's on the screen to access it. The exit code for today's session is BP 12922. And note that this must be completed by Tuesday, December 13th at 7 a.m. As a reminder to speech language pathologists, ASHA credits are also being offered for ASHA CEUs. In order to receive those CEUs for this event, you must complete the survey in its entirety with your information as known to ASHA. Only surveys completed by the deadline of Tuesday, December 13th will be submitted to ASHA.
Heather, I can't see the survey slide. Do you have that?
I am so sorry.
No, that's okay.
I must have stopped sharing and then didn't reshare.
There it is.
Great. So I'm still here if there are other questions or reflections. You're probably overloaded by, is it 4 o'clock in the afternoon your time?
Yes, it is.
It is. Yep. I think you gave us great information today. Thank you so much.
Oh, I hope so. Well, great. Thank you so much, everybody. It doesn't look like there are any other questions, so.
I think you left everybody with a lot to think about, a lot of wonderful resources to look more into.
Great. Okay, and with that, we'll call it a day then, I guess.
Okay.
Well, on my slides is my email, so if anyone has specific questions, you're welcome to email me, and I'm so grateful for your invitation to present to you all. It's been a great day, so thank you so much, and everybody have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, you too.
Okay, great.
Thank you, everyone.